It was a few years back. I'd gone out drinking with some old friends from that little tavern in Alderheim, the one with the really good meat pies that used bear meat. We'd done our fair share of drinking already, and some locals were giving us a run for our money. They kept saying things like, "Oh, you're doing great for out-of-towners," and, other reductive shit. Of course, old Bertie, he didn't take that too well. He said he could outmatch any of the young bastards that tried him. Well, one of the lads said to him he weren't any tougher than the Wodenwraith. Now, old Bertie's not the kind to back down from any sort of a scrap, and deep in his cups, as we all were, he spat back something about strangling any old wraith, anytime, anywhere. And so, the local lads were up and helping the old boy out the door of the tavern before anybody could stop him. I was too drunk at that point to do much more than fall asleep on the table, and so, not long after, that's exactly what happened. I stayed there until the tavern keep came and kicked my stool. It was dark as pitch, and most homes had already snuffed their lanterns when I stumbled out in the streets. It took me a bleary minute or two to work out where I was. I damn near forgot about old Bernie. I realized the old lad was probably in a heap of trouble. Might be wrestling some gator off in the swamp by now, knowing him. So I lit up my hat with my light cantrip, handiest thing I ever learned at the temple, and started wandering around, asking after him. It wasn't very long before I happened across a couple of night watch, and of course they asked me what I was doing out at this hour. I told them a friend of mine went after the Wodenwraith with some of the locals, and they turned pale as a ghost. Said they'd try and get their bodies back in the morning, and thanks for letting them know, but I'd best get indoors. Now, I don't scare much, but something about the way they looked at me and talked made me uneasy, like they weren't just yanking my chain, and I strongly considered turning in back at the bunkhouse for the night and letting Bernie sleep in the swamp. But I must have still been a bit drunk, because I reckoned he'd be real sore with me if I just left him out there, and decided to go on with finding him. So I thanked the watchman for the advice and asked if there was anywhere specific the locals might have taken him to confront this Wodenwraith, whatever that was. It took some convincing, but when they saw I wasn't going to give up, they relented and told me that the swamp gets deeper about a mile from town, and there were little boats out that the locals usually fish from. They said take one of the boats and paddle it west till I see a stone woman sticking up out of the water, and then I should be able to see the other boat, if indeed they went that direction. Once again, I thanked the men, and they touched their hydras, and they wished me well. Almost as a reflex, I went for my own hydra, and the damn thing was gone. I guess somebody stole it while I was asleep. That one bothered me quite a bit. I was quite fond of that holy symbol, and it's all I had left from my temple days. Ah well, what was a cleric of Adriel to do these days, so I soldiered on. I followed their directions out the west side of town. Followed the dirt road all the way past the last thatched farmhouse, and the road ran right down into the swamp, like maybe the water didn't used to come up so high. Listening to all the chirping and croaking, I couldn't help but wonder if some of those were bullywogs waiting for me to get away from the village so they could swallow me whole. I hiked up my trousers and took a deep breath, then waded out into the swamp, sticking to the shallowest places I could find. I was knee-deep for a while before it started getting deeper, and a couple of times I lost my nerve when a frog jumped nearby or some critter hollered when I got close. Occasionally, there were these muddy banks, and I'd get up on them and look for prints. Sure enough, every one of them had a bunch of boots and bare feet. Looked pretty recent, so somebody had definitely come this way. Eventually, I got where I couldn't find any place where the water didn't come up to my chest, and I retreated back to one of the banks. I could swim, but I wasn't keen on swimming in the dark. This whole venture was crazy enough as it is. I didn't even know what I was going to do once I got caught up to them. Sitting there on that bank, I was pondering on what I should do next, thinking about turning back when I heard this weird whistling sound, like somebody was trying to get my attention. I turned, but I didn't see anybody, and obviously now I'm unnerved. It's one thing to think you're alone out in the swamp, but knowing somebody's out there with you, and you don't know who, well, it creeped me out, and I did something stupid. Hello? Like the bleeding idiot I am, and heard something splash off a ways. Quick as a whip, I reached up and ended my light cantrip, hoping the dark would hide me from whatever it was. In hindsight, that was stupid, because it didn't have a light, so I'm not sure why I thought it needed one. I stood up and steadied myself, grabbing hold of a tree about as big around as my leg that was sprouting up from the mud I was standing on, and looked hard out in the dark, just trying to see anything. I'm not sure what, just anything. Seemed like an hour passed, and I still couldn't see a damn thing. I heard one of the frogs panic and jump in the water about 30 feet away in the dark in front of me. Whatever it was close as hell and damn quiet. From somewhere, I gathered up the nerve to twist my hands together and mutter a quick prayer to get my light cantrip going again. and suddenly the area was bathed in bright light. It's not the most powerful spell, so it didn't reach very far, but it went out far enough to light up whatever it was in dim light. The thing was huge. All hunched over in the water, it was easily 9 feet tall if it stood up. Sickly gray skin, wrinkly, long, gangly arms with odd proportions, like all the muscles were bunched up in its forearms. It had the shape of a man, long black oily hair, exaggerated features, and a huge mouth, slightly ajar, filled with broken and jagged teeth sticking up from thick, dark gums. The creature started at the sudden light and brought its long-fingered hands up to shield its reflective eyes from the glare. I heard the damn thing hiss before it started charging me. Lucky, I think I blinded it, because it charged at an angle instead of right towards me. The water was sloshing, loud as hell. It took me precious seconds to get my legs going in the opposite direction, and I felt like I was flying across the water, practically skipping like a stone. Ever felt fear like that in all my life, running from little mud island to even smaller mud island, trying to put as much distance as I could between me and that beast. I ran till I was near collapse, no idea where I was or what direction I was headed, but I could hear it sloshing around behind me, the deep sort of katoom sounds you get from putting your foot down really hard in the water. Ahead, I see one of the boats the watchman described, and I think to myself, man, I hope this thing can't swim. I found some inner strength from somewhere. Maybe Adriel herself helped me along, as I pushed out that little boat and hopped aboard, grabbing the oar and paddling like a man gone wild. That thing, of course, didn't even slow down. It jumped right in the deep water and started paddling like a dog after me. Lucky for me, wasn't quite as agile in the water. No idea how I kept away from it for this long when we were running on land. Didn't know where I was heading, but I kept paddling, legs getting some desperately needed rest, lungs on fire. I knew it was the end for me, but I saw solid ground not far. It looked like a sizable piece as well. I reckoned if I could outrun it when we were sloshing around on the water, even as tired as I was, I could really put some distance between us there. Got right up to the edge and hopped out, and ran like my legs weren't made of lead. Nearly tripped over another boat further up the shore, noticed a few of them. Maybe there were people here who could help me. I was delirious, soggy, terrified. And as I squelched up this muddy shore, I was nearly blinded by a ray of sunlight that hit me right in the face. Seems like I'd been running so long, day was beginning to break. I bought myself some good distance running, and decided I couldn't run anymore. I had to stop, so I got behind the biggest tree I could find and plopped down, trying to breathe as quietly as I could while my lungs felt like fuzzy shards of glass. A man stepped out from behind a tree ahead of me, a bald fellow with some kind of crazy tattoos all over his scalp. He had a long knife in one hand, and it looked like he had a cleft lip. Not really thinking straight, I tried to splutter out some kind of warning about the monster that was chasing me, but I don't know if he understood me, because he just kind of calmly started walking towards me, holding the knife low. For reasons I still can't quite understand, I just started chuckling and wheezing. I guess I figured it was funny that I'd run all this way from some kind of monster, and now I was just going to die from your regular old run-of-the-mill stabbing. Probably some bandit layabout punk looking to make some quick coin from my misery. Well, the joke was on him, because I heard something heavy crashing through the brush behind me. The guy looked up, and now that he was looking away from me, I could see his ears were long and pointed. An elf. Probably one of the palace. I figured I was a very special kind of lucky to have run into one of them out here. The elf kind of got this wide-eyed expression and yelled out something I couldn't understand, and took off running towards the creature with that knife held up. I found my legs, struggled to my feet, running away from the screaming and crunching as fast as I could manage. I kind of stumbled my way out of some bushes and fell over into some uneven stone pavers. I landed kind of hard on my shoulder and scraped up my face. Picking myself up for what felt like the 1000th time this evening, I looked up right into an elven man's face. Same crazy tattoos, same big knife. Hell, there were dozens of them. Looking around, they were all just staring at me. They parted like grass split by the wind, and a huge tree with legs and arms started walking towards me. It was too much for me. I couldn't do this anymore, and I just gave up. I closed my eyes, and the tree thing picked me up and started carrying me somewhere. Didn't know where, just hoped it didn't hurt too much when he smashed me against a rock. I finally worked up the courage to look around, and I caught a few glimpses of that monster following us. The tree thing didn't seem to notice. He was holding me like you'd carry some soiled clothing. Figured things might turn out okay after all. Maybe the tree thing was just taking me to the edge of the elves' territory. That is, until he held me up high behind his branches like he was about to fling me to the capital. I didn't even have time to panic before the bushes exploded and the man-beast thing leaped out and grabbed hold of tree thing. I get dropped in the chaos as those two really start beating on each other. I'm seeing bark and leaves get ripped off and oily hair getting thrown scattered around on the ground. I land pretty hard and I think something might be broken, but I'm not one to spit in the face of fortune. I go as best as I can in a straight line and I make it to the water's edge, where I see a couple little boats and I help myself. I row out and across the channel and then I'm gone. Fully daylight by this point, so I have no trouble getting back to the town's edge. I remember falling out of the boat next to some poor fella's hut, and just kind of laying there, breathing. Next thing I know, I wake back up at the tavern. Seems like the tavern keep, Beulah, put me up for the night. And it's a good soul, that one. He says his wife found me when she was returning from hunting herbs. I told Beulah about what happened, and he held up the back of his hand to my forehead. He said I didn't have a fever, and asked me how much I drank last night. I told him never mind that. Did anybody find Bernie's body? Beulah looked at me with this really concerned expression and said he was sleeping off a mighty hangover in the next room. I couldn't believe it. Bernie was alive? I tried to stand up, but my left leg collapsed underneath me. Wasn't folding quite right. Decided I'd rest more and asked Beulah if he'd send the watch up to my room. I needed to report what I'd seen in the swamp. He wrinkled his brows so hard I thought they'd snap off. Told me there hasn't been any watch here in years. Not since young Lord Alder left and took all his coin with him. I never did solve that riddle. Don't think I ever will. Not with this leg and the nightmares. I've been seeing his face more and more lately. If I had any coin left to me, I'd hire some young fools to try and kill it. I know it's still out there. Fisherfolk and woodsmen go missing in that swamp from time to time. I think I might have seen it when I went scavenging around the dry lake bed. I hobbled away before I could know for sure, but I think it might have followed me back to town. I'm afraid to go home now. That thing is a hunter, a bestial sportsman, and what fisherman wouldn't jump at the chance to catch the one that got away?